Hello, YouTube. Welcome once again to Fractured Realities. This is going to be a little bit different than most of the videos that I do. I'm still always going to do my truther videos and try to impart knowledge about occult and history, as well as, sometimes political views and what people like to call the truther movement. But in a group that I'm part of on Facebook, I was talking the other day, and somebody posted. They talk a lot about serial killers. Somebody posted a picture of a serial killer. It was, I happened to mention. I'm like, hey, I knew this guy. I knew him sort of, kind of on a personal basis, so to speak. I'll explain a little bit of that later, but. And, they compelled me to, write out a story about it or tell it. So, instead of writing it out, I decided to just, make a video about it and kind of share my experience. Now, he wasn't the typical serial killer. He wasn't a white male between the ages of 30 and 40. Not the basic white bread American style serial killer that we're used to. But he was quite prolific when you look at numbers. He had more murders than BTK. He had more murders than Jeffrey Dahmer. He had more than the Zodiac, um, Richard Ramirez, Charles, the entire Manson family. And all. So, if you're wondering who I'm referring to, his name was Anthony Sowell. He pronounced it so well. I've heard it pronounced when he was in court as Soul or Saul, or it's been pronounced several different ways, but I'm going by the way he actually pronounced his name. Now, the reason that I met and had interaction with Anthony back in, what was it, the early 2000s, from the early 2000s up until 2012, while I was still living in Cleveland, Ohio. The job market was pretty stale. There wasn't a whole lot of good jobs to be had at the time. And, I had two very young children who I was raising as a single father. So I had to get something that was consistent. So I began working in security. And at first, of course, I did, the basic things. Worked at stores. Later on, I started working at scrap yards where people were, I'd have to stay there all night long because people would come in and steal metal from one scrapyard to the other one. And at the time, the economy with the economy scrap metal at the time, China was buying just truckloads and truckloads of any kind of scrap that they could from the United States. So the prices just kept shooting up. And there were some of these guys who would come in there and spend a couple hours gathering stuff up, stealing, and get out of there. And they were making a couple grand a week. I mean, it was ridiculous. So it was a pretty profitable thing. There were quite a few different people who were involved in it. Anthony Sowell was one of them, and I actually had interactions with him on many of the different posts that I worked as well. But the first time I recall running into Anthony Sowell, I was working at a place called Wilkoff Metals in Cleveland, and I heard some banging around, and I walk out, and there's a guy just standing there, and so I yelled at him and told him to stop, and of course he didn't. And now Anthony Sowell's not a big guy; he's about 5'6", maybe 5'7", 130, 140 pounds. Here's me, 5'10", and 200 pounds. So obviously, I'm not going to catch, a 140-pound crackhead. He burned me straight off and took off. But then again, I ran into him quite a few other times, and most of the time, a couple of the times, I detained him and put him in the cuffs, and the police would show up and just basically take him around the corner and release him because they didn't want to do the work or go through it. And I'm not in any way downgrading the Cleveland police. I do understand from their point of view because I have actually had court time where I had to go and testify against these people, and they're either outright released or they're charged with something like trespassing. So it's no big deal. Who cares? They're going to pay $125 bill for trespassing and still make a couple grand a week stealing metal. So I mean, there was never the judicial system pretty much failed in that. So the police were just as frustrated as the rest of us. Anthony was always very polite, very cordial. He was never really mouthy about it when he got caught. He sort of accepted it. He didn't fight or or he'd run if he could, but if he couldn't, if I had him cornered and I caught him, it was just basically, okay, you got me. All right. And a lot of the times when I had him detained, what am I going to do? Sit there and stare at him? Yeah, I had conversations with him. He'd sit there and tell me about his life, told me about how he worked in this, I believe it was an electronics factory for a little while, and he got hurt, and that's why he's doing that. And he's really not a thief. This isn't what he wanted to do. And he's a Marine, and he's honorable. He was really proud about his military background too. He was in the Marine Corps. He was stationed in Okinawa, and he was also stationed somewhere in California, I believe. So he's been all over the place. He did a lot. He was an interesting guy, and he wasn't unintelligent. Yes, he had a drug problem, but you could actually have a conversation with the man. He wasn't a bad guy, and I never. To me, doing security work was a job. It wasn't. I wasn't trying to play police officer. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was going and making a living. Doing something that I could handle. So I treated him with respect, like I did most people, unless those people treated me with disrespect. So, hold on one second. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, that was my daughter calling from work. I'll get back to that later. But anyway, okay, yeah, like I was saying, I try to treat people with respect. They're human beings. I've had my experiences of. Well, I'd never say I was a criminal, but I've broken laws in the past. I've never been put in prison, but I've been in jail a few times. So I've been on the other side of that token. So I'm not one to judge people based on their life. It's hard to do when you really do deal with crackheads and negative people and people who live these. I mean, some of these guys like literally would live in abandoned truck beds and they would sleep there. They would lay in the mud for hours and hours just to steal scrap metal. So I mean, it's a completely different subgenre. Like, I mean, other crackheads even. Okay, back again. Sorry about that. Apparently, I'm a more popular guy when I'm recording than I am when I'm not. But anyway, yeah, like I was saying, and the metal yards. I worked also grocery stores, and I'd see Anthony come in and out of the grocery stores. He would, you know, nod to me or whatever. Like I said, most of the time when he was being held for the police to show up and do their reports, he was Pretty talkative though. Told me a lot of stories. Of course, he never shared anything about being a mass murderer. That was something that actually caught me by surprise because he was a pretty timid guy. He wasn't a violent sort. There was another occasion that I can think of where he was in a domestic violence issue with a woman who lived there. Now, I'm not going to be sharing these people's names because I haven't spoken to a lot of the people in person, and I won't put people's names out there on the internet if I haven't. And I don't want to cause any more pain to the victims' families, or there were actually quite a few survivors. There was actually 5 survivors of Anthony's attacks as well. So for that reason, if you want to know the names, it's easy enough. Look it up. There's plenty of other YouTube videos, and I'm not doing this to specifically just talk about Anthony. It's just basically my interactions with him. But anyway, yeah, the domestic violence incident. He got a little belligerent. He wasn't obviously happy to be cuffed and held, but the woman had visible physical injuries. But she, of course, did not press charges on Anthony. So there was never any court involvement or anything in that. It just the police took him and he disappeared. I don't know if they cut him loose or if but she refused to press charges anyway, so it wasn't going to go anywhere. And a lot of times with these domestic violence issues, women won't press charges, and when if you are a victim of domestic violence and you don't press charges or follow through, the police are going to get frustrated. They see this day in and day out. And a lot of times the women will even attack them when they're trying to arrest the guy who just beat them to death. And I mean, I understand the control issues and what women go through, but, I could talk about this and do a whole episode about it. But, you don't have to, love doesn't hurt. Love doesn't strike you. Love doesn't call you names and destroy your self-esteem. Those are all forms of abuse, and that's not something you have to put up with, man. There's nearly 8 billion people on this planet. There's somebody who will treat you well, and I just want to say that. Okay. Anyway, now back to Anthony. That was one of them. Then I actually did work in a couple of the different scrap yards. The last, okay, and there was one time when Anthony did get a bit aggressive with me. He was drunk and probably cracked out too. He was pretty fond of crack cocaine. He was yelling and screaming at a female through the door. I never spoke to her. She wouldn't open the door. She wouldn't talk to me. She just wanted him away. So I told him to leave the property. And he just ignored me. So I yelled at him, and he turned around and looked at me, and he got kind of wide-eyed. This is the only time I've seen any kind of aggression out of him. And he held his hand up like this and said, "I'm a Marine. I'm not going to be disrespected." So I just, stiff-armed him and shoved him back, and he fell down on the ground, and he yelled a little bit. And then when I started to come towards him again, he just got up and he apologized and left the property without incident. But that was the only time he actually got physically aggressive. And several times I caught him stealing metal. And I was tired of trying to hold him till the cops came there just so they could go around the corner and release him. So I would just make him put the metal back in the yard. And he complied. He wasn't a belligerent person. He was actually a very polite guy. We got to know each other. They had a nickname for me. They called me Shaggy because, I don't consider my hair long, but, a lot of them considered me to have long hair if it stuck down below my collar, so they called me Shaggy. A lot of times I would come to work not shaving. I mean, I'm working in the fucking projects. I'm dealing with murders and rapes and arsons and all kinds of crazy crimes. I have to respond there and I have to control the scene until the police arrive. So I wasn't real worried about appearance. And besides, whenever the news cameras showed up, I was long gone. I mean, that's a long-standing policy. You don't talk to the media about anything, especially when you don't even know what happened. You just respond, you react, you report, and you move on. You let the police handle it from there. But anyway, so yeah, and eventually I graduated out of where I had to work in the scrap yards and doing armed security at McDonald's and several different restaurants and bars and businesses, to where they let me work in the apartment complexes, which I could tell several hours and hours of stories about that. That was just insane. If anybody knows anything about the projects or HUD housing in general, I mean, I always considered the projects the big brick buildings. I worked in some of those, but I also worked in some of the newer ones that were like row houses, and they're actually pretty nice. But you still have the same people, and a lot of the people who live there are disabled. And one thing to keep in mind is all disabilities aren't physical. A lot of them have mental problems, drug issues, and substance abuse, and violent issues. And yeah, it was definitely an interesting period in my life. Not something that I miss dealing with day in and day out. But anyway, the very last time I saw Anthony was, I believe it was late 2008 or early 2009, right around the time that this all came out. And I'll explain a little bit more about the case here in a minute. But the very last time I saw Anthony, we got called by a security guard who was afraid. So we had a patrol car, and we were armed, and we were literally right across the street or right down the street. So we went there to respond, and we look out, and there's Anthony piling up scrap metal. So I looked at my friend who's a Marine, and I'm like, let's get him tactically, because he's got a lot of room to run. So my friend stood out in front and made sure that Anthony saw him. So while Anthony was kind of trying to hide or get out of view of him, I just came up right behind him. I did have my gun drawn, but I never pointed it at him. I had it held down at a 45 degree. I'm like, hey, Anthony, I'm not going to need this. Oh, no, you got me. Very compliant, very polite. He started a conversation with my fellow officer, because they were both Marines. So they were talking about that. And here's what he said to us that was the most bone-chilling thing. And I didn't know I didn't think about it at all at the time, but later on it really struck me. He looked at me and he said, you know what, I'm glad you guys caught me. I'm like, what do you mean, Anthony? He's like, man, I have some serious problems. And I looked at him and I'm like, let me guess, drugs. And he's like, oh yeah, well, yeah, I have a drug problem, but it's not just that, there's other stuff. And I'm like, well, is there something you were trying to tell me? So he just kind of laughed. He's like, no, but he's like, jail's probably the best place for me. It's 3 hots in a cot, and I don't care. And I'm like, okay, well, you might go to jail, probably not. You know how this works, Anthony. They'll probably cut you loose around the corner. And he had like literally about $1,500 to $1,600 worth of scrap metal piled up. So it wasn't like, it was frivolous. Like he's picking up tin cans off the ground. He was making a major haul. He had a truck parked out behind the property, so he was ready to go. And anyway, that just struck me, because about 4 months later is when, apparently Anthony lived in his sister's house on 12205 Imperial Avenue in East Cleveland. Now, East Cleveland, I don't even know how to describe East Cleveland unless you are from the area. You can't understand it unless you see it. Normally, when you have suburbs that are outside of the city, they're nice, and around Cleveland they are. Parma, Brooklyn, They have their problems because they're close to Cleveland, but they're not bad in crime rate. But for some reason, East Cleveland is the exception. East Cleveland has the second highest rate of AIDS per capita. Um, One of the highest rates of drug use. Several disappearances, and a lot of those could have something to do with Anthony, which I'll get to in a bit. But East Cleveland's just not a great place to be. It was they're nice old big giant houses, but it's just the urban decay. It's just not a good place to be. But so yeah, and one time I'm just sitting there watching the news, and there's Anthony popping up, and I'm like, what the hell? So I called my friend, and I'm like, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Then they started talking about it, and they said that they found several bodies on his property. Okay, so I'm going to try to give just a brief explanation of what what happened with Anthony. Apparently, he invited a woman to his house to smoke crack. They got high. They got into an argument. He beat her up and he raped her. And he tried to choke her, and she pretended that she was dead. And later on, when Anthony was asleep, she got up and she started walking around the house. Well, she thought she heard something, so she went to go into a bathroom at the house and noticed the horrible smell. And she found the desiccated body of a woman in the bathtub. So she ran out of the house. She got the police. Little interesting backstory too. People had been smelling the smell of decay for years and years and years, and there was an abandoned lot right next to Anthony's shop, and then right on the corner was a place called Ray's Sausage. It was a sausage factory, and they got the blame for the smell. Several health inspectors. I'm not sure if the business stayed open or not, but yeah, or probably relocated. But they they got the blame for the smell. Nobody ever thought to look in the abandoned field and the holes that were dug out there. But anyway, the police came in. They found several bodies that were hidden in crawl spaces inside the house. There were several in the yard that were dug up. They actually found a woman's severed head in a bucket in the basement. Apparently, Anthony had a couple social media accounts where he called himself a master. Wanted to find women for discipline. He was real into the bondage scene, and his modus operandi was okay. And this is going to get a bit graphic, so if you're easily triggered, you probably don't want it. He would have sex with the women, whether they consented or not. He was actually convicted of rape about 4 or 5 times. Spent, was it 6 or 7 years, was released in 2005 for sexual battery, assault, attempted murder, a bunch of other crimes. They got him for attempted rape and battery, I believe. But yeah, he had a long history of this. But he would have sex with the women, and when he did it, he the preferred doggy style from behind. And at that point, he would wrap a cord, an extension cord. He had several lamps and stuff like that. Like I said, he was a scrap collector. So you take the lamp cords and you wrap them around the women's neck and pull back. Now, if anybody knows anything about bondage or about the community, there's certain things that's called breath control, where people can have a highlighted orgasm if they're asphyxiated. But there's certain ways you have to do it. There's time limits. There's amounts of pressure. It's actually, there's a science to it. You don't just choke somebody, because you could easily bruise somebody's trachea. You could, it takes about 6 minutes total to strangle a person. So, there isn't a lot of accidental deaths because of this, but it happens. But that was Anthony's defense, is that all these women who he killed were accidental, that they were engaged in sex, and that's why a lot of times, because of the nature of the relationships with these women and these women's drug habits, they wouldn't be taken very seriously, so he wouldn't be charged or cases would be dismissed. There was another time, this was, I believe, in 2006 or 2007, where the business next door had a camera that was facing it, and you actually see a nude female jump out of the window. And then you see him, who jumps out also nude, chasing her down the street. Then she went into a bar and said that he tried to rape her. Because she was a drug addict, I guess the cases were dismissed. He was never charged. But she was, like I said, one of the survivors. And they found, Anthony, later on they went to trial. He was obviously convicted. He was sentenced to death. They found he was convicted of 11 murders. Now, being that I worked in a high crime area, I often had to work either with the police or help the police. So I actually know a couple of the police who went into the house and seen just how horrific it is. So I have a little insight and knowledge as to things that weren't released to the press or that they didn't know. One thing, well, the way that I described the strangulation, they said death by strangulation. They didn't say it was sexual asphyxiation. But he also was a necrophiliac. He would have sex with the women after they perished. And here's another thing, and this is something that very, very few people know about, except for the police that were at the scene and the few people that they told. Anthony had a signature about him and the way he would kill women. After he killed the women and finished, his business with the corpse. I don't mean to put it so blatantly, but I don't want to get real graphic on this. He would lean over and take a bite out of the women's cheeks. So, and he would literally consume the flesh. Now, I don't know if he consumed other flesh. Here's another thing that wasn't released to the public, is that the 11 were the ones that they could identify. Now, they found pieces of different body parts scattered out about the house. Because I guess some of the victims he chopped up, some he buried whole, some he beheaded, but they found pieces of different women, and based on the level of the decay, they couldn't really identify it. Lack of fingerprints, like, they would find a body part, but there wasn't anything identifiable on that body part, like a fingerprint or teeth or. So there was possibly up to 15 bodies at his house, and there were also several incidents that had happened, because people don't just start becoming a serial killer at 47 years old. This is something that they do earlier. So I believe that probably in California, when he was a Marine, or in Okinawa, Japan, there were probably other victims. We'll never know, and the reason that we'll never know, number one, Anthony died in prison last year, but he'd been sick. But I actually, I wanted to do an interview with him. I'm like, hey, I know this guy. He'll talk to me. He's talked to me before. Maybe he'll talk to me about his crimes. Anthony absolutely, he did write me back, but he absolutely refused. He would not talk about his crimes. He claims that, his defense up until the time he died was that they were accidental deaths, and he was scared, so did what he did with the bodies and buried them or hid them. But, they were all accidents, but you don't have, 11 accidents like that. Um, they're just pretty intentional. Like I said, it takes about 6 minutes to strangle people. It's not like in the movies where, you put a hand on their throat and 3 seconds later, pop, it's a very malicious act. It takes some time and strength and effort to actually strangle somebody like that. And that's why he would drug the women first, apply them with alcohol and that type of thing. But yeah, so I mean that was my experience with him. I of course moved away from Cleveland in 2012, so I wasn't there, but they ended up demolishing the house on Imperial Avenue, and they put a victims memorial up on the spot. So that's nice. And like I said, and the most frightening thing of all is in that area, there's over 20 other women that have disappeared and they don't know. And sadly, because of the fact that these women are drug addicts, some of them were homeless, are indigent, mental problems, the police really never thoroughly had much to go on to investigate their disappearances, so they don't know. So, I mean, John Wayne Gacy killed 33 people. Who knows how many people Anthony Sowell killed? I hope that, someday they can get closure to some of these people and to their families as well. But yeah, I mean those were a few of my experiences with Anthony. He was just a nice, kind of quiet, easygoing guy. But apparently, don't let perceptions fool you. People have dark sides, so be careful about anybody that you're around. I don't care if you've known somebody your whole life. We all have a dark passenger hidden within us. Either we control it or we don't control it. But we all have that there. We all have that evil. And there is that capacity to kill within every single person. And you never know when you just might be sharing space with a serial killer. So be very, very careful out there, people. I love you all and thank you. I hope this didn't offend anybody. I'm not in any way trying to offend, like I said, the police, the victims' families. I just wanted to share this story with everybody. This was my experience with the serial killer. All right. Thank you all. You guys have a good one. Bye.